Welcome to an episode of Just Girls with Histories Unearthed. We got some exciting content to discuss today, so get ready. Let's start off by introducing ourselves.
Hi, I'm Kendyl, and I am an art education major with a concentration in painting and drawing, and I enjoy taking a fantasy book to coffee shops when I'm not working on art projects.
Hi, my name's Alana. I'm a Chicano studies major with a minor in PR. I love going to K-pop concerts and going on study dates with my friends at cafes.
My name is Jasmin. I'm a Chicano studies major that adores going to concerts and spending money on albums.
Hi, I'm Fern, like the plant, and I'm also an art education major with a concentration in painting and drawing as well, and I enjoy mountain towns and journaling.
So providing the 3 to 5 examples from the modules for the podcast project and our entire semester's engagement with podcasts. How and why did the examples of the podcast episodes that I listened to and studied provided strategies, practices, and ethics that informed the creation of the group's podcast? So for the examples of the podcast episodes that I listened to and studied provided learning methods like comprehension and complex texts that were formal but also informal, but still providing like the important conversations. Especially how learning online is becoming more normalized. I thought it was a great tool to use as we were able to listen to conversations that we would normally miss out on by not being in a physical classroom, but also including what we learned from the podcast to a discussion post to communicate with our classmates. And giving like that interaction with one another while being still fully virtual seems like hard to accomplish, but with this class and the way it's formatted, I think it was really successful. And yeah, so for the first example, it was from one of the most recent modules, the first discussion episode for episode 1 of Exterminate All the Brutes with the professor and Mariana. Mariana mentioned a conversation she had with like another scholar who she met with in California, and they were talking about how they like realized how similar they were, even though they had different indigenous histories, but both reside in California. So a quote that I took from that, she says, "It's because we reside in the same land. It's something about the land that we are both still in California. We both come from California. This gap sort of bridges, and her being native to California, it's like her history is also mine now." I thought that was really significant. And it resonated with me because it shows how complicated our history is and how we can construct a new future. And this course has shown like time and time again about how important it is to document history and the events that take place to learn, reflect, and grow from those mistakes in the future. And then for the second example, I took it from the reading in week 13, The American West and the Nazi East, a comparative and interpretive perspective. Beginning on page 4, it stated, of the early American Republic and Nazi Germany regions were major events decisively impacted the historical development of these nation states, as well as the future of peoples living within and near their borders. In practice, as political leaders acted on their ideological obsessions, they became the sites of violent national projects of territorial expansion, racial cleaning, and settler colonization. Projects with deadly consequences for ethnic and racial outgroups in both metropolitan and colonized living spaces. I wanted to highlight this quote because I didn't realize how you can compare these two events, but it's comparing them by giving us like a perspective in their own respective national histories. But this text was made to help fill like the gap from scholarly claims based on the references mentioned in regards to the comparison of like the Nazi East to American West, but by investigating the two extreme political violence in context to early America and Nazi Germany territorial expansion and also like their empires. And then for the last example, I like to highlight a quote from the Alchemist Manifesto, episode 9, season 3, Lutz. And then this was in week 15, but the main topic of this podcast was confronting violence in context to historical trauma and how it compared to the work of Gloria, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, and then Rao Peck. And then So one thing I got from the podcast first, like the meaning of LUTs, it's basically to bring light to something and bringing in the methods of healing from something that was very traumatic. But the podcast focuses on episode 4 in Exterminate All the Brutes. But the main idea of this episode is how to allow yourself to move in a direction of healing. And then taking the quote from the podcast, in this episode, we see there's a possibility for historians to tie national histories to transnational and international processes, even though they're in a different time and place to the Holocaust of the 1930s and 40s. It's directly tied to a much larger historical process in terms of which is of that the extermination of indigenous communities. And then it kind of goes on after that, but I wanted to spotlight that version because, or that like part of the quote, because I thought it related back to the previous example really well and seemed like it had a really good connection with that theme. But this podcast mentions how to heal from the trauma that was caused by the violent territorial expansions and settler colonizations from these events. And then, yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. You want to go first, Jasmine?
If I could. I'm just kidding. Okay. I like just to add a part in where Kendyl stated, like how complicated our history is, how important our history is to document. And I really think this stuck out to me solely because it allows us to fully denounce the events the United States was built off of, and like just technically like holding those who caused pain to be held accountable, especially since that's really what our country is built off of. So I just really like that you added that. That's it.
Cool.
I also want to mention like how you I like how you highlighted like the relational histories and of the two, Mariana and the other professor or like scholar in California.
Yeah.
That like so we don't really know like that how we're related. Like they didn't know what they were, but they were related at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And
I thought it was really cool how she like was like, we're not related, but like in a way.
in a way, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And her history is like also mine. So I think that's like a big concept of mine too. Like we're all related in some way. So how can we turn a blind eye to like the tragedies we all experience too? Like we should use those to support each other. So I think that concept of like relational, like as humans too, like we relate to each other and we feel for each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Well, going off my point of like talking about relational histories and how we can learn from each other and support each other, I want to build off the question: in what ways does Raoul Peck's Exterminate All the Brutes articulate methods, sources, and stories that generate relational histories amongst communities facing genocide, annihilation, and extermination? So I would say, like, in my opinion, Exterminate All the Brutes discusses genocide, colonization, white supremacy, and slavery as relational histories amongst communities. I don't really think many people want to acknowledge the effects of colonization and the impact it had on the world and its people. Exterminate All the Brutes mentions indigenous people and African people's genocide as a result of European expansion. So many people suffered due to these countries' quote-unquote curiosity of the world, but in reality, that curiosity was pride and power, as the colonizers did not treat the new people that they were curious about as humans. And we talked about a collective healing as communities. With the communities we talk about, like indigenous people, African people, Asian, and like Hispanic people, we've talked about those. And so I think it's important that we understand our past and call them out when they happen today. As we know, history repeats itself, and Peck intertwines himself in his story, and he sort of questions himself a bit, but I think it's impactful that he explains his role and growing up, in which in turn relates us to the viewers and invites us to understand this healing understanding has to be collective and work with each other, and it cannot be individually done to heal. So in the first example I want to use in the beginning of episode 1, Peck uses this example of white people in Sweden feeling threatened, and even just like the whole concept of white supremacy, having to prove their whiteness and prove that they're still in power. It's like in the beginning, so like around less than 49 minutes. My timestamps are kind of different. Also look at moments like January 6th with the attack on the Capitol. Like I want to use this example to show the beauty and resilience of these communities we discuss in class, and that a lot of the times that these acts of calling out history are done with pride and beauty in a community and solidarity, but they're not respected, they're not seen. And that's like one relational concept we can talk about, like that we haven't been heard, we haven't been seen. But yeah. Sorry. Then his stories also let these communities resonate with historical and generational PTSD and trauma. So telling these stories encourages relational histories and healing within communities and with these individuals. But yeah. In episode 1, also Exterminate All the Brutes, a concept I found interesting was how colonizers were treated by natives and how the natives got treated back in return. And a clear example in the beginning of episode 1 shows an indigenous woman trying to negotiate or try to just talk with the colonizer, and she instantly gets shot as a response. And also another scene arises that tells us that they didn't respect these individuals, as Europeans viewed Africans as rude, and in turn, this was an excuse in their eyes to treat them the way they did without feeling guilty. And moving on to the idea of having an excuse, the idea of manifest destiny can be defined as settler colonialism. It required violence and the annihilation of natives to be replaced by settlers. And that's around like 24 minutes, well, less 24 minutes remaining. Violence includes the indigenous children and the crimes they face, like being taken from their families and put in schools to quote unquote save them. And even today, Native American women have their children taken from them at alarming rates. But this is a relational concept that these communities share. African American bodies were treated as labor and property. And these communities, they share their relational histories and its effective slavery of indigenous people through Spanish missions and murders and African slavery and forced removals. And going on to like, I wanted to mention or highlight that topic of like how Native American women have their children taken away at alarming rates. It's institutional practices to keep like people of color and these communities oppressed, while the white people, like the oppressors, stay in power. And it's also just like a way to push out and force propaganda. But then, sorry, going off this topic of white supremacy and colonialism, the reading for week 13 discusses the Mexican-American War. I want to start off with this quote. The goal was to maximize the accusation of Mexican territory while minimizing the accusation of Mexicans, from page 18. This quote says a lot about US colonization. I feel that there is a lot of propaganda when talking about the US colonization, as the war was supported with this idea of a new land and a quote unquote frontier that was settled by quote unquote brave and hardy pioneers. But the Mexican-American War had an impact on communities, and it really ultimately kicked Mexicans from their land. While they wanted to take their land, but they didn't want to give them any rights. So it's just like that example of like, they want to just take as much as they can, but not give anything in return. And it's just, I think it's a common or like universal experience. But like I said, they forcibly removed and murdered Mexicans and many other crimes that came from war. Another quote states, the common misperception of Mexicans as an ethnic group new to the United States obscures the legacy of American colonization in shaping the Mexican-American experience. I want to use this quote to show how the U.S. took from these people, but did not want to return what was owed. And we know this is true from Native American reservations and the idea of reparations that continues to be ignored. And here I also wanted to connect the Mexican-American experience with the Japanese-American experience during World War II. Once there is an enemy in the eyes of the oppressor, they're going to pry on them and ultimately take all their rights and humanities from them, like removing Mexicans and taking their land, but not wanting to let them into this new land that the U.S. claimed for themselves. And Japanese American and actually many Asian Americans were targeted as an enemy during the times of crisis, resulting in a kind of common or universal experience of feeling like an outsider and feeling like the enemy. When these communities do not feel welcomed and are shown they aren't welcome by the US or any institutional power through actions like being the first to be removed and viewed as an enemy or being forcibly taken from your homelands. This is also evident in the Chinese Exclusion Act, where the US benefited off the Chinese labor but did not want to pay their dues and use them when necessary or when found fit. Another quote from Exterminate All the Brutes, around timestamp like 17 minutes, 58 seconds remaining, says the old settlers spilled blood to acquire the land, but the blood spilled was indigenous blood. It's clear that these institutional structures want to take as much as they can from these communities and drain them, but do not want to support them during times of crisis. So as members of these communities, we need to be present for each other if we can't depend on the structures that tell us and teach us that they help everyone, but really only help and support one group. But with that being said, the podcast with Dr. Obando and Mariana discuss episode 1, and Dr. Obando mentions this myth of the US being a quote-unquote nation of immigrants. They debunk this myth because these communities do not come to this country voluntarily. For example, Africans were forcibly taken from their homes, Mexicans were removed from their land and didn't want to be let back in. And the first indigenous people of this land were ultimately exterminated. At timestamp 5 minutes and 31 seconds, when speaking of Indigenous and African individuals, Dr. Obando says it was a forced journey across the ocean. The only ones here that really can be considered immigrants are Europeans, and they're accepted here, and they chose to come here. If we call this nation a nation of immigrants, it undermines the work the communities we discussed in class have done and doesn't recognize the harmful history and tragedies that really happened, like genocide and annihilation. At timestamp 2:24, Obando says it's a myth. It erases pivotal histories. Historians call the extermination and enslavement of Indigenous people as the first Holocaust. History doesn't tell this story, so actions like forgetting or coining the term quote-unquote nation of immigrants, it ultimately makes it okay to not remember another person's history and to not let people heal, and erases the relational history we all have some connection to. At timestamp 6:50 to 7:30, Obando says, what does it mean to deny, erase, not even welcome the possibility of understanding these histories, not seeing the relationality in a country founded on Holocaust genocide? This is just one of the ways that communities are kept separate to keep us under control when the oppressor benefits from. Sorry. And going back to healing, that concept I want to use with like relational histories to understand each other, Dr. Obando says these histories are not political formations. The embodied practices of these histories is what happens when a part of your body has been erased and your memory. But also what happens when we start understanding these histories as ours and thinking of positions as a result. A central theme of mine is connecting these relational histories collectively and intentionally. So I found this quote to really sum up the impact of trauma and pain from genocide and annihilation. So going off that point, I want to know, what do you guys think of the term nation of immigrants? And if you don't agree, what would you call it? Thank you.
Okay. So honestly, reading this, like the term nation of immigrants, at first I agreed with it. But as you were speaking towards like what Dr. Obando has said, I kind of disagree with it, because to me, before, a nation of immigrants was basically those who wanted to come to America for a better life, basically the driven people that seeked a better life in order to succeed and give their family the life that they deserved. But now, like, I feel like I don't agree with the nation of immigrants solely because we're looking at it from the aspect of like how this country first started, and all of us were basically displaced from our homes and moved here as like a means of like, white people basically growing more and succeeding more than we are, so I kind of don't agree with it anymore. Or I'm like half and half. I think like from past history, like in the view of this now, I don't know how to feel about it.
No, I totally agree. Like I was at first, like I also thought it was like I kind of understood like the term and like why it was called that and everything, but now I'm like kind of the same way where I'm like, just because like also taking from the documentary and like all the readings and everything that we've gone over this semester, it can really show how history can be skewed depending on who it's coming from and what perspective it's coming from. So I think like depending on like a lot of histories, like retellings of like who it was told from different perspectives, like the truth can, like be one thing and somebody can say it's another. Like it can be very skewed. And like you said, like our country like started out with like people coming here to get a better life, and I think that was the message in the beginning, but it definitely like over time it became less and less that.
I also agree with like the mixed feelings, because I too would like think about it as like people coming for a better life. Like, we are a nation of immigrants. People from all over come to the US, and they come for better life and opportunity, but it's like they're leaving their countries that have been like exploited by like outside powers, because for me, like I think about Mexico and like how wonderful it could, or how much more it could flourish, but it's like they're overshadowed by like the US, and how I can't really put it into words what I want to say, but it's like had the US not been like such of a superpower of it is, like, okay, for example, in Tijuana, I know they have like Amazon like factories and stuff or warehouses. So that's where like the US is, taking cheap labor from Mexico, and it's like the Mexico is not benefiting from it. So that's kind of like how I see it. People are forced to kind of come here because the US just, that's the way they built their country.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I really had that same like idea to like, what do you mean it's non-nation immigrants? But like some people didn't want to come, some people had to come, and they're like we said, like they're displaced. Like you said too, kind of like the histories were taught, and I feel like it really doesn't recognize like the tragedies that indigenous people went through too. Like they're not immigrants, they were the original ones here too, and people that were forcibly brought here, like they didn't have a choice. And like how you said too, Fernanda, about like how Mexico their source of labor, because I that's a big point of mine too, like that a universal experience or like the universal thought that the US has in like other countries, that they're just like something that they can take advantage of and then dispose when they don't want it anymore. Like how you said, like Amazon billions in Tijuana, like very low pay probably and just not good working conditions. It's that same thing too. Like they want to use the labor, but when like people can benefit from it, they don't like it. Or like even like building the wall and the concept of like trying to split the US and Mexico, like they want to do that, but now that they need this labor, all of a sudden like they want to give jobs. So it's just like really, really weird. But do you want to say something?
No, I just was agreeing with you. You
Oh.
put it into better words.
Thank you. But I want to conclude with this. With that said, relational histories and past are connected to the present and future as history repeats itself. Forgetting these histories will only make us step further from each other, which in current social times we need to be with each other and support each other. It's been years since the Holocaust of Jewish people, Jewish and other individuals, and as survivors are growing in age, we still need to talk about these histories to not forget and not to lose the sympathy and compassion we must have for each other. And it has been years, but we still face crimes against civil rights and humanities, which we cannot forget. So still, call out the concepts of reservations and reparations and building the wall. We truly cannot forget about our relational traumas so we can continue to protect each other and thrive from each other. Yeah, that's my point.
All right, moving on to segment 3. Just as Alana was saying, history repeats. So why does Exterminate All the Brutes allow an endeavor for collecting witnessing of history that is intimate, embodied, present, and ongoing? Basically the 4 episodes of Exterminate All the Brutes is based on an agonizing history of white supremacy. The work by Rule Peck, it allows us as viewers to fully recognize the foundation of how the United States was created, as well as European society. It's a grasp on events that have happened or are in possibility of happening again, or as we can see within like the events that are occurring right now, like it's literally happening. We're all just taking it in. We're being aware and witnessing these events allows us to fully comprehend just how the world functions and why these events tend to function. And it also it gives us the opportunity to see who, like what history benefits and who it truly impacts. And going into the episodes, Exterminate All the Brutes allows and endeavors for collective witnessing of history that is intimate, embodied, present, and ongoing, because in each episode we get the events in history that have helped form this nation. The genocide, colonization, and the effect of both have helped illuminate hate that has been and continues to run through our history. In episode 1, The Disturbing Confidence of Ignorance, Rule shows the conditions needed for genocide, so exploitation and slavery, conquest, and we see the connection within all the events presented playing out, and then we basically view the world by the impact that those events created. And in order to truly grasp the events that occurred, we need to witness history from the side we often ignore, which Rule Peg honestly does a beautiful job in allowing us to view like the impact of the people who were affected. We're basically witnessing within the first episode the erasure of natives in order for the United States to be formed. And there's a chilling video within the episode where it goes from 1781 till present time, and it like basically it like starts removing every native like land from the US map until like there's none left. And it's chilling because we're still doing that today, and it's like the concept of it's wired into the process. It's wired into wanting to make America solely like out of colonization, where we're not really represented within the society. And I like found two quotes from the first episode where they stuck out to me. One being the happiness of one cannot be built on the pain of others. And then violence was created equally by the notion of the colonized and the colonizer. And I feel like those two really represented episode one. Moving on to episode two, Who the Fuck is Columbus? We unpack the events of the story we've been fed as children to teens, which basically led to the discovery of our country, where they place Columbus as this person who didn't really do anything but discover, which we know is a lie because we now know the mass genocide that was caused by Columbus in order to start gaining land for this country to form. We gained the creation of whiteness from the chilling events of the slave trade, where in that exact episode, it shows images of how many people were trafficked within the start of the United States. And it just like the numbers grow. And I believe it gets to like 12.5 million by like the 21st century. I also want to point out how witnessing this history is intimate and necessary to understand in order to grasp that we, the minority, and I'm saying this in quotations because are we really, like minority? We were never meant to be a part of the US society. We were just a mean to the European and, ethnocentrism. And then for the quote that I chose for this episode, I think, honestly, what is a flag? A piece of cloth to die or to kill for? And I just love this scene because it shows how they were cleaning up the flag from like literally like cleaning it in the water, like the rivers, in order to get the blood stains out of it. And it just goes to show how like, there's no empathy in their actions. They just were willing to harm in order to gain. And I believe this is really why we need to collect history and distribute it in a sense where we're like being held accountable for these actions, because it's still in effect today. Like all of the impact they've created back then is still happening today, and we're continuing to witnessing it. And in episode 4, The Bright Colors of Fascism, this honestly was my favorite episode. The question to me has been answered in all episodes, but this episode really allows me to like see that nothing has changed. Peck uses the myth of pristine wilderness, and he gives us the notion how killing and displacement was basically a mere answer towards having uninhibited land. And it just uninhibited land, like where no one is using it. So they just took away land from natives in order just to let it go to waste, basically not being appreciated. It's just sitting there. They just did not want natives to have it. And by displacing, we used our Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. It basically allowed us to not only exterminate Native Americans, but also enslaved Africans that we brought from a different country to use within this country. And we like basically killed them off after we were done with them. There's a part where we get into our national leaders, those who take an oath to lead our country. And Peg goes on to express their lack in empathy for the events and the pain we've caused in order to be where we are now. And within this scene, it shows Trump, Obama, Bush, basically all the presidents where um they've all, all presidents have done something where we don't agree with, and it just shows that they're willing to do whatever it takes in order to make America the supreme power. And there's no empathy in the lives that we're losing as, like, humans. Like, they don't care for that because they're not a part of this country. And we're all aware of, like, the comments that Trump has made, and I think there's also a lack in empathy for what he said. And I think he's a prime example for, like, why we speak about history in, like, present time, because the past comes to haunt us now. Peck also states how important it is to denounce the consequences of the past, and how those same actions have, of course, affected us today. We still see a lot of events that have occurred, to occur, and as much as we've, like, progressed, I think we're still ignorant to a lot of these events because we're still unaware of what's going on in a lot of places. And honestly, we have that technology to do it, but we're still lacking in that area. And just to provide the quotes that stuck out, there's one where it's like towards the very end of the episode. Peck just goes on to say, "It's not knowledge we lack," and I believe he says that in means to show how we lack empathy. Like, we lack those emotions in truly caring on, like, the events we're creating or allowing to create. And then there's also this one, it's towards the beginning. It's like is showing, like, these powerful pictures, and there's this one picture that stuck out to me. It was when Trump was president, and all the migrants coming into this country were being held in cages. And basically there was a quote that was said, and it's, "Everyone else is the enemy." And it's literally these people in cages without arms, power to, like, harm us. They're just coming here for a better country, as we spoke about before, coming here for a better, like, because we've literally impacted their country, or, like, outside powers have, like, gone to their country, destroyed it, so they want to come to a country that they believe could give them that success, but we're not welcoming them. And basically it's, like, in regards to having power and domination. And then I just want to add that these episodes, they helped me open my eyes to more on what's going on right now in the world. It's interesting to see how this content from, I believe, 2020 is proving how history or violence is never ending at the hands of those wanting to gain power. And I just wanted to see how you guys felt about these episodes, because I know um I've seen, like, the mixed reviews on Google, so I wanted to see, like, as you guys were watching them, what were your emotions?
I think, like, for me mostly, I was just shocked. I think that's like the one word that I would think whenever I, like, look back on what I watched. Um, but also, like, I think it goes back to how, like, how much information when we were in school, like secondary education, how much history that was left out. And this show, like, really captivated the detail and how much happened during certain, like, events that we weren't exposed to. And I think that's why, like, I felt shocked. It's just mainly because, like, we didn't get that exposure when we were learning about these historical events. But that's kind of, like, mostly how I felt when I was watching them.
Honestly, yeah, because I know when I first started out the episode, it kind of just the very first episode, it kind of just dove in to, like, role, like, speaking about, like, the information or the history that has occurred. And we've never really gotten that exposure, as you said. And it's just like impactful to see how he gave us that kind of exposure in order to understand. Like, we needed to see this that these events denounce that hate, and truly, like as you said, I was shocked, like just to be able to see all of this being captured in just 4 episodes.
Yeah, so my opinion too, I want to say like I was like pretty shocked, like what Jasmine said, like how I like that you mentioned like he started off strong, and I think going back to what I'm sorry, group Jasmine, oh Fern, oh no, I'm sorry, Jasmine, on question 3, like talking about being taught like with accountability, because when he starts off strong, he is kind of teaching you like history from that perspective of being accountable and realizing the tragedies and not seeing like the fluffy part, being like, oh yeah, like there was Native Americans and they met him and like they became like a new country. No, but there was a lot of trauma and pain and genocide and crimes against them. So he's teaching us like from that history, that part where we should be teaching history from. But let me see it. When I was watching the documentary or like listening to it, I was trying to listen to it and take notes, but like I just realized I got like intrigued and I was just watching it. Like I feel like you're like, it's like when something happens, like you're so shocked, but you're just continuously watching like silent, like kind of like that, like you're just taking it in. Sorry, yeah, that's how I felt about that episode.
Exactly. I totally agree. Do you guys have any more comments on it?
Can I add something too? Actually, I really do like
Yeah.
that you mentioned Trump a lot, because like I remember we were like children too, like when I was in 8th grade when he was like became president, and I thought like my family was gonna be gone. Like I thought we were like all leaving, all
Yes.
getting removed from the country. And like looking back at that as an adult now, and like I really think Trump is like a personification or like embodiment of that history repeats itself. And like even negative histories, like they will repeat. And it's the people like I don't know how he got into presidency. Like it's just crazy. It's just he really shows like how far and how we can act with no sympathy. And
Yeah.
oh, sorry, looking at him like
Sorry.
him is just like an example. Like his whole thing is make America great again. Like it just made it worse. And that idea of a great again is just like 1940s, 50s when it was just like white people ruling the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I felt.
Yeah, like I think it goes back to like how it can come out depending on your perspective, like who's saying this, because like from his perspective, like maybe during that time that was when, like America was thriving, but like for majority of people that's not when it was. Like it just I completely agree with everything you said about Trump. Like it was just a very, again, like history was very skewed from his perspective.
Yeah, I think definitely America has like always been thriving for the like through the white male perspective, like just because it's been designed that way. So because I touch on that too, it's how when Trump became president, it was like he woke up all the like super
Yeah,
right extremists and like because I don't know, before him, I don't really remember seeing so much of that. So I
I
don't
feel
know.
like
Mhm.
sorry. But yeah, like we were kids in that sense, and you heard of it, but I feel like with him being in presidency, like it was in your face. Like he
Mhm.
let it happen.
Every
Like
single time, yeah.
yeah, like it was
And
just
when
like
we were finally allowed to have a say, like and vote,
like you
so
have this
like
thing. I feel like he really did, like you said, like we know white people, white men especially, like keep the world running in power.
yeah.
But like it really solidified that idea. Like you see it here, like white businessmen running the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I also feel like when he was president, that hatred would be publicized more. So
Yes.
like it like allowed like events from the past to reoccur again, because we got a lot of hate violence from a lot of communities because of what he was saying. He just allowed that hatred to like grow and grow without ever like oh, I'm so sorry for the hurt I've caused all of you. And we'll never get that from him because of
Yeah.
how he is. But he just allowed that sense of hate to repeat within, like, we're in the 21st century, like we're in 2023. And I think ever since he got his platform, like as a president, he was able to like invoke that violence to like be heated again, like get people to like hurt.
He really let it be okay for people to do. Like he let it be like a normal thing. And it's so
Yeah.
embarrassing. Like I remember like watching like the it was a 2021 election when like Biden won, and countries were like, welcome back. Like, how embarrassing is that? Like, we were so far back. And like, even when people like support him, like, oh, like he's just so real. I'm like, he has no sympathy, no empathy. Like, he's a bully, and the way he talks to people, like, it's just embarrassing to say that you support him. He does not care about anyone else but himself.
Exactly.
Yeah, we got heated.
Okay, understanding the connection with how the past events have been presented. Let's get into how exterminating all the brutes connects what we've learned.
So, okay. So exterminating all the brutes connects and expands our learning, not only for this chapter, but also for the earlier chapters that we've covered since the start of the semester. This documentary series further demonstrates the violence and erasure of history that we've been taught throughout grade school. It demonstrates the obsession that white people have with genetic purity and the superiority complex that is baseless. And I say have because still today we see people feel that way across the globe. Like Exterminate All the Brutes demonstrates how interconnected the histories of violence, genocide, enslavement, dispossessing, torture in all its forms, physically, mentally, and emotionally, because it is in the past, we are not rid of it. There is no justification for it, not through the language used to reduce anyone other than a white person, and not as a means of conversion either. So something that Exterminate All the Brutes touches on is how when we think about revolutions, we think about the American Revolution or the French Revolution mostly, because that's just what we've been taught in school. But the Haitian Revolution of 1719 is not what comes to mind. So in Unit 1, we learned about resistance revolts from Diouf that we don't typically learn about in grade school. So for instance, a quote mentioned by Diouf is, Wolof had also rebelled in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in Santa Marta, Colombia, and in Panama. It appeared as if they were establishing a trend, and so 6 years after the first cedula, which is a warrant, the Crown issued another, which made reference to uprisings having resulted in the deaths of several Christians and stressed the danger still possessed by the Wolof. They were described as arrogant, disobedient, rebellious, and incorrigible. This attitude is consistent with men who, as Muslims, thought themselves free. They could not accept being enslaved by Christians or being forced to convert. The refusal of their new situation translated into disobedience and rebelliousness, and as noted by the legislators, could not be corrected. So this is the history that doesn't get told because, as the documentary mentions, history is told and framed by the victor. Excuse me, when we learned about the Japanese internment camps in grade school, I so vividly remember just glossing over the history, like we were mentioning earlier, like they kind of just, this is what happened. We met the people, like when Christopher Columbus came, like they met the natives and then we had Thanksgiving, right? It's just very like cut dry, don't really get into the details. So even in the instances where we'd learn about the violence the US would cause Indigenous peoples, it wasn't until Unit 2 when we learned about interoceanic diasporas and the histories of race that we learned about similarities between the relocation of Indigenous communities and the relocation of Japanese Americans during World War II, that we see connections. In Interning America's Colonial History, so that was one of the readings from chapter 2 or unit 2, the anthologies and poetry of Lawson Fusai, India states, the Tule Lake region of Northern California, an area that witnessed both indigenous resistance to relocation and Japanese American wartime dissent, is a politically charged geography at the center of Inada's work. So the entire U.S. is politically charged territory through the 86 treaties that the U.S. made with indigenous nations and violated time after time. Exterminate All the Brutes also mentions how indigenous nations were arbitrarily considered domestic dependent tribes. So any treaty had to be approved by the U.S. Congress, which we constantly see the U.S. just making up rules and regulations to keep and uphold white supremacy. We saw it when the U.S. abolished slavery, but then made up laws to prevent the Black folk from succeeding in a white man's world. I mentioned it earlier, but the white folk, like the documentary says, have this infatuation with a superiority complex. Exterminate all the brutes, like we've been doing all semester, decolonizing the history that we have learned. And I think that the people that glorify US history and their historical figures really need to reevaluate and learn about the untold stories from the past. I think that when Trump became president and really heightened far-right extremist Proud Boy, I was really disappointed that even today we still have people that feel that way. So like we were talking about earlier, and after everything I've learned this semester, the colonizers have really planted seeds that took root and continue to grow in people today. I mean, we see it with like the outdated systems that are set up for the white man. I think that like us as students in this class, we're doing our part by decolonizing the history that we've learned. And for me personally, as someone that wants to be an educator, I do want to incorporate these truths into my lessons and stop perpetuating the history of the very narrow side of history that we get, or one-sided history. So yeah, what do you guys feel like this class has helped with decolonizing the history for you guys that you've learned throughout?
I found myself getting more and more interested in how history continues to play out within our timeline. Within this class, I feel like I've learned to understand the multiple perspectives that are often ignored from education and emphasizing with these events. As I say this, I literally mean it, because we've started off learning about like history that I've never known about or never actually like read into until this class. And I just also want to like include that exterminate all the brutes allowed me to solidify my thoughts and feeling comfortable with decolonizing the history we've been fed since we were kids, solely because, as you've said, Fern, I believe like as you want to be an educator, I feel like incorporating these truths will like change the way our minds think, and it'll allow us to open up the possibility of having more empathy on what's occurring. That way we can grow as a as a population, rather than just solely feeding off that hatred that we continuously seem to have.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm gonna go off of what you were saying, Jasmine and Fern too. Like, I'm also like in the same position as you, Fern, where I'm going in education, and like we're both gonna be teaching art. And I feel like specifically with this subject, like we can take a lot of what we learned from this class, especially how like the history, like what we learned in our own classes during our secondary education, but how much more we've learned from this class, taking all of that into how we teach our students how to like share their opinions and their own, like how to speak their mind, but also being comfortable being able to speak it. Because I feel like when we were in school, a lot of the times we would have the opportunities, but not a lot of people would be comfortable saying certain things because we didn't have that practice and like having those conversations publicly with each other in class. So I think like that's one of the main things as a future educator I want to incorporate, is like making sure all my students are comfortable talking about these histories without feeling like they're looking at it in a wrong way, if that makes sense.
I really like your point, Kendyl, too, talking about like being an educator and creating a space for like students to have, because I think it's really important. Like when I took my ethnic studies class in high school, the first portion was in person and COVID hit, so it was online. But I remember like being able to communicate. Like I had the teacher, and she gave us the resources that really like let us talk. And there's gonna be some people that like don't put their heart into it, don't really try to actively listen. But the fact that you're creating space for those people that want to listen and want to understand these histories is important. And I think like thinking back to you guys said like secondary school and learning, like when you're a kid too, you learn like the kind of stories. Like I loved history because it was like a story, like a retelling of a history. Oh, it is like a retelling. But when you get into high school, I kind of just feel like it becomes the facts. And like I took AP World History, and it was kind of just like the facts of what things happened, just facts. Like they went here, they did this. Like there was no like what's the word, like emotion to it. It was just kind of just straight facts. And so taking an ethnic studies class after that really put it into perspective. So in terms of education, I want there to be more like an emotion and a connection to it rather than just facts being told and you being forced to remember them. But I do like to, Jasmine mentioned, like, we're making the effort, like, oh, sorry, we are making that effort, like, as students, like, we are doing we have some role and we have some part of, like, talking about history and understanding it. And it's our choice if we want to teach others a history and if you want to have that responsibility of teaching too, because I'm trying to say this, like, as a person in the community, it's not your job to teach others, like, especially people like white people, like, oh, well, I don't know, so teach me. Like, it's also their responsibility to take a class like this, like we did. Like, it should be in you and it shouldn't be someone else's burden to have to teach you. I'm talking about adults, so like teachers, like, yes, I applaud you, I congratulate you for teaching. But I also wanted to conclude this with saying too, like, this class, I've learned to feel more comfortable with sharing my opinion, and I've had fear of sharing it because I didn't know all the information, all the details, and it made me kind of like nervous that I didn't sound credible or it wasn't like correct and someone's gonna like check me on that. But I think it's just the fact of talking about it and bringing light to these conversations is important. And not everyone's gonna agree with you, and it doesn't matter. Like, you should still be confident in your opinions and the facts of history. And to conclude off, like everyone said and what I said, this is really prevalent today with the current genocide in Palestine, Congo, the Chinese repression of Muslims. And in past times, we only had news sources that the information could be gatekept and skewed. But today we have phones and we're seeing the live news of what's happening to people, and it's just repeating itself. So we cannot stay silent. So going back to relational histories, like, we have to support each other and we will not be trampled under the institutional effects of white supremacy and colonization.